So Stefon Diggs, the star wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills, was appearing on The Shop recently. And Stefon Diggs was asked about just kind of what's going on in Buffalo, not able to get over the hump. What are the issues there with the Buffalo Bills? And the Bills wide receiver, while on The Shop, broke it down and described how he feels what is missing from the Buffalo Bills as they're trying to compete and still try and win a Super Bowl for the first time in franchise history.
What are you missing to get over the hump in your? Are you missing anything? Is it execution? What do you think?
I think it's more execution than anything. There's small little pieces on why you're not going right, and I'm like this. You can wreck your brain. Like, we got the players, we got the plays. Why ain't coming together? And I'm like, that's when you draw so much question. And I never want to question who I am. I never want to question how I am. I'm giving it everything I got. I'm dying on the hill of that.
So that was Stefon Diggs, courtesy of The Shop, talking about what's wrong with the Buffalo Bills. They're in a really odd spot because it does feel like they're third in the AFC, and that's played out the past couple of years. They got exposed by Cincinnati this past year at home. They seemingly can't get past Kansas City in the playoffs. They had their opportunity, and they, kind of a fluky ending to the game, and the defense and giving up that big completion to Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce and all that stuff that played out the year before in the NFC divisional round. And it feels like it's Kansas City, Cincinnati, and then Buffalo. And then all the, Leslie Frazier stepping away from the team, that seems a little bit strange as defensive coordinator. It just feels like maybe the Bills came around this version of the Bills at the wrong time, having to deal with Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes in the same conference.
As we kind of talked about yesterday, I feel like there's always a little luck that needs to land on your side. Some people will say they're not an excuse. There has to be just great execution, like Stefon Diggs is talking about. There's got to be a high degree of execution, but there's got to be a little bit of luck too. And so maybe that's a little bit what you're touching on there. We also tend to forget, they went through a transition this past year in OC. Ken Dorsey took over play calling. It's not Brian Daboll anymore. We saw the job Brian Daboll, did leading the Giants to the playoffs and being coach of the year. So that drop off there, I think, could have played a little bit of a factor in the team and how they operated or executed. Leslie Frazier leaving doesn't help either. I mean, the Von Miller injury, it can't be understated.
Oh, yeah.
Because that was their closer. If you go back to the Rams Super Bowl, at the end of the game, they're going to make it about Aaron Donald. But if you don't have Von Miller on the outside to create some of the pressure he was creating, it doesn't matter. And I thought that injury really impacted the way their defense operated. The other thing I'll just generally say is, as we look at rosters just in the AFC East, okay, I don't know that the Bills have that great of a roster. I mean, they've got Josh Allen. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. They've got Stefon Diggs. He's one of the best wide receivers in the league. Besides that, who are you looking at saying is one of the best players? Maybe Tre'Davious White at cornerback, but he's missed some time. He's been banged up. Jordan Poyer, who I believe might be a free agent at this point.
Yeah.
So, you start going through the roster and you go, okay, like the Kansas City Chiefs had 7 Pro Bowl players this year. The Bills had 4, at least initially upon voting. So when you're trying to stack yourself up against, the best in your conference and the team you have to beat to get to a Super Bowl, it becomes a bit difficult if you can't match them talent-wise. And then you start looking at the rosters within their own division. I mean, I would put it this way. Would you rather take Stefon Diggs and the Bills wide receiver core or the Miami Dolphins?
Oh, Dolphins.
And I think you start looking at best cornerback play. Look, Tre'Davious White's up there. Sauce Gardner right now he's a top 3 probably cornerback in the league. He might be the best. And he just drafted him. Garrett Wilson is working his way to be one of the better wide receivers in the NFL. You start looking at the Jets roster and some of the young players they've got. Quinn and Williams, the impact he's had. At one point last season, I thought he should have gotten more attention for potential, defensive player of the year. He was playing phenomenal. So there's other teams now, even within their own division, that I think have gotten more talented and made things way harder for them just to be able to survive this season. And then getting through the AFC, playoffs as well is difficult when you've got to deal with the Bengals, you've got to deal with the Chiefs, and you got to deal with other teams with top end talented quarterbacks. So, look, it's going to be even more crazy to watch if Rodgers joins the AFC. I keep touching on this, but I mean, imagine a playoffs where you've got Rodgers, and obviously him and Josh Allen. One of them's going to be one of them's going to be a wild card. But those two teams, I would imagine, are both going to the playoffs. You've got the Bengals. You've got Patrick Mahomes, obviously with the Chiefs. Justin Herbert probably has a wild card team with the Chargers. I mean, you're talking about some of the most talented quarterbacks, and then potentially Trevor Lawrence, lead the way in the AFC South. Like, they're all guys who I think you looked at as first round drafted quarterbacks, but franchise quarterbacks, and guys who all have the caliber to be Hall of Fame quarterbacks. Every single one of these guys. I mean, Rodgers already is, Mahomes already is, but Burrow, Allen, Herbert, Lawrence, they all have the potential to be. And these are the teams that could be squaring off, at least for the next couple of seasons, the quarterbacks that you're going to be watching the playoffs. It's a gauntlet. Like, I'm trying to think of another time where when we went to the playoffs, you were like, dude, like every single game's must-see TV because of how good these quarterbacks are. I mean, we always had the Brady and Peyton Manning in that era of, when they would have to score off versus one another when, it was Indy and New England, and then it was, Denver and New England. But you had Ben in that mix, Ben Roethlisberger. But it wasn't like you consistently had, 6 quarterbacks you're looking at going, my God. Like, any team would be lucky to have these guys as their starting quarterback. And by the way, that's not like, discounting anyone else, whether it's Lamar Jackson, who could, be a part of that as a Baltimore Ravens quarterback if he's back, or Tua, the way he played under Mike McDaniel this past year, if he can stay healthy. I mean, you could start throwing in some other people into that mix, but it's crazy to see the talent, at least the level of talent of some of the quarterbacks in this conference and what it could look like. And if Stefon Diggs is frustrated now, and they obviously need to increase their execution, it's only going to get harder moving forward.
Yeah, and look, we've talked about this before on the show. What was Phil Mickelson's biggest problem during the course of his career in winning more majors?
Tiger Woods.
Yes. So, like, sometimes this just happens to where you come along at the same time that somebody just happens to be an all-timer. And as of right now, Patrick Mahomes has had the best start to an NFL career possibly of any quarterback in the history of the league. And Joe Burrow has completely helped turn around an entire franchise, and he's got that it factor to where he shows up in the playoffs and they're winning games. Because you just go back to that game against Buffalo, man, that game was a wipeout. At no point in time, when Cincinnati went down and scored, at no point in time did I think, and trust me, I bet Buffalo. All right, so maybe that was part of the problem. At no point in time did I watch that game and think, oh yeah, the Bills are back in this. It was over. Like they had nothing for them.
The tough part about that, though, is it had nothing to do, in my opinion. I mean, obviously, I thought the Bengals did a great job on Stefon Diggs. But that had more to do with just the overall physicality of Cincinnati in that game. They played so much better up front than Buffalo did, and it was almost like a mentality. They just were not going to allow Buffalo to be the more physical team, and they kind of heard about the matchup of the defensive front for Buffalo versus the Bengals' offensive line and the injuries and everything else. And they just ran the football down the throat. Like, they set the tone early when Joe Mixon was, running for 5-yard clips. Like, I remember watching that thinking, like, this isn't going to end up being the shootout we thought between the quarterbacks. It might become that at some point in the game. But Zach Taylor was very much had his mindset on making sure he realized, like, this is still football. We can still be the most physical team, where everyone kind of, discounted that or forgot about that when it was all said and done. And I thought that was one of the low-key things that was surprising, considering Sean McDermott's background, where he was a wrestler. He tends to come off as a guy who's not going to allow people to push them around, and the Bills got pushed around. They almost feel a little bit like a finesse team at times, outside of the way Josh Allen runs, because he's the most physical runner they have on that team.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out for the Buffalo Bills. And look, maybe it'll work out in their advantage because they're not the favorite to win the Super Bowl this year. So there's that.